They were once thrown out like nothing, but now they've become everything their uncle never believed they could be. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, check the description or the pinned comment for the links. Let me know where you're watching from. The crisp London morning was a reminder of how far Ada had come. As she stepped out of her private office, tucked inside one of the city's renowned medical consultancy buildings, her staff rose to greet her. She had just concluded a session with a high-profile client, a Nigerian senator's wife who flew in for medical advice. Ada wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a global name in healthcare consulting, offering wellness programs for elite women across Europe and Africa. And to think, 10 years ago, she was scrubbing toilets in Nsukka just to survive. Back then, rejection had burned like fire in her chest. Uncle Dominic's words still echoed sometimes. "You're just girls. You have no place here." But here she stood, in heels worth more than he probably earned in a year, with a medical degree, global influence, and a heart still beating with purpose. But success hadn't made her forget where she came from. One of her proudest projects was a health outreach initiative she started in Nigeria called Nurse for the Village, a free clinic program for pregnant women and children in underdeveloped areas. It was during one of these trips to Abuja that fate wrote the next chapter of her life. He was tall, clean-cut, and soft-spoken. Victor, a UK-based trauma surgeon volunteering with her team, caught her attention the moment he introduced himself. But it wasn't his profession that got to her. It was the way he treated patients. The way he looked at a crying mother with compassion. How he lifted a sick toddler in his arms without hesitation. He had no idea who Ada was. He wasn't interested in her fame, her designer shoes, or her SUV. He was interested in her heart. Their connection grew quickly. Conversations stretched late into the night after outreach days. He shared stories of his childhood, losing his own mother to childbirth because of poor medical care. Ada shared hers, minus the bitterness. She didn't talk about Uncle Dominic much, but when Victor learned, his admiration for her only deepened. A year later, under the open skies of Cape Town, with Table Mountain casting its majestic shadow behind them, Ada and Victor exchanged vows in an elegant beachside ceremony. The guest list was intimate: family, friends, and mentors. Chisom designed her gown, and Nosi sang her down the aisle with a soul-stirring gospel medley that left everyone in tears. But there was one name missing on every invitation: Uncle Dominic. Not a single call was made to him, not one word. And it wasn't out of hatred. It was because Ada had long learned that some people choose to exile themselves from grace, that sometimes the past belongs in the past. The wedding made headlines in Nigerian magazines and medical journals. When two angels heal the world, Nurse Ada and Dr. Victor tie the knot. Social media buzzed with admiration, especially from young girls who followed Ada's story online. Back in the village, Uncle Dominic first heard about the wedding from a yam seller at the market. "Dominic, did you hear? That your niece, Ada, the big nurse from London, married a doctor. Ah, the wedding was in Cape Town. I saw pictures on Facebook." He didn't respond. His jaw clenched and he turned away without a word. But when he got home, he locked himself in his room. No one saw him for 3 days. Ada didn't know this, and even if she did, it wouldn't have changed the thing. She was now Ada Nwoke Victor, a name she wore with pride. Her husband adored her, his family embraced her, and her future stretched wide with possibility. Weeks after the wedding, the couple returned to London to settle into their new life. But Ada hadn't forgotten her roots. She sent her outreach team back to Nsukka with supplies, and Aunt Ifeoma received a brand new fridge, school fees for all 5 of her children, and a letter. "You took us in when the world turned its back. Today, we want the world to never turn its back on you again." Ada had no plans to return to that old house where her uncle once spat venom at her. Her home was now filled with peace, with purpose, with love. And as she stood beside Victor on their balcony one evening, watching the London skyline flicker to life, she smiled and whispered to herself, "If only Daddy could see us now." While Ada found healing in stethoscopes and hospital wards, Chisom's sanctuary had always been the sound of a sewing machine and the scent of fresh fabric. Long before success ever knocked on her door, she used to sit by a broken singer machine in Aunt Ifeoma's small parlor, stitching clothes for neighbors who could only pay with Gary or secondhand shoes. But she stitched anyway, not for money, but for hope. In those days, Chisom barely spoke unless she had to. She let her hands do the talking. Her quietness was often misunderstood for weakness, but inside her burned a fierce determination to prove that what the world tossed aside could still shine again. And shine she did. After years of sewing non-stop and watching YouTube tutorials late into the night, Chisom began posting pictures of her designs online. Her styles, modest, elegant, and proudly African, started attracting attention. But her true breakthrough came the day she entered a Lagos fashion competition under the brand name Chisom Couture. She was up against designers who had studied in Paris, Milan, and New York. She had only the humble lessons from Aunt Ifeoma and the grit of survival. While others flaunted feathers and metallics, Chisom unveiled a collection titled From Ashes to Gold. It told the story of three sisters rising from rejection to glory, each outfit layered with emotion, heritage, and style. When the final model stepped onto the runway wearing a hand-woven gown embedded with recycled beads from Nsukka's village market, the audience went silent. Then came the standing ovation. The judges, including two international fashion editors, declared her the undisputed winner. Overnight, Chisom Couture became the talk of fashion blogs and magazines. Orders poured in, celebrity stylists called, investors offered deals. But Chisom remained grounded. She opened a flagship store in Lekki and hired young tailors from poor communities, training them to become designers. She told them, if you have thread and belief, you already have power. In her second year of success, during a charity fashion gala in Ghana, Chisom met Tunde, a soft-spoken tech entrepreneur who owned a fashion logistics startup. He had followed her story online and was instantly drawn to her purpose-driven life. Unlike other men who were intimidated by her quiet elegance and rising fame, Tunde admired her vision. They became friends first. He would visit her workshop just to watch her draw. She would test her sketches by showing them to him before anyone else. He called her Queen of Lines because of her signature flowing silhouettes. Over time, their friendship turned to love. Not the noisy kind, but the patient, deep kind that didn't need grand declarations to feel real. Tunde proposed on the third anniversary of Chisom Couture with a custom ring he designed himself, shaped like a needle piercing a golden heart. Because you healed so many wounds with your thread, he told her. Their wedding took place in Abuja at the National Arts Theater, surrounded by Chisom's signature designs and attended by Nigeria's creative elite. Her gown was, of course, her own creation, an ivory blend of satin and lace that paid tribute to her late father and Aunt Ifeoma. Nosi sang again, this time with a live orchestra, and Ada gave a heartfelt toast. Just like Ada's wedding, Uncle Dominic was not invited. But that didn't stop the news from reaching him. An Okada rider brought a magazine to his compound, laughing as he showed the wedding photos to his fellow villagers. Ah, Dominic, your niece Damari Abuja big man, oh? See her fashion show for TV last week. Even First Lady wear her cloth. Uncle Dominic slammed the door shut, but inside his hut he wept. This time, not out of anger, but regret. The girl he once dismissed as just another burden was now dressing governors' wives and building schools for orphans, and she hadn't even looked back once. Chisom, meanwhile, moved into her new home in Maitama, Abuja. It wasn't the size of her success that made her proud. It was the lives she changed along the way. Her workshop now trained over 30 young girls, many of whom had once lived on the streets. One evening, as she stood in her garden, holding Tunde's hand and watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of gold and lilac, she thought of her sisters. of the days they used to cry in silence, huddled under Auntie Fiona's leaking roof. Now they were women of substance, women of impact, and their journey wasn't even over yet. They used to tease her for singing to the chickens behind Auntie Fiona's house. "Nosi, go and fetch water," her sisters would shout, only to find her humming with her eyes closed, barefoot in the dusty backyard, as if the entire world was her stage. Even when hunger clawed at their bellies, Nosi's voice never lost its strength. It only grew more powerful. While Ada found purpose in medicine and Chisom stitched her way to success, Nosi found her calling in sound. As the youngest of the three, she was often shielded from the harshest moments, but she remembered everything. Uncle Dominic throwing their clothes into the streets, their long walk to Nsuka, and Auntie Fiona's sacrifices. Her emotions lived in her voice. By 16, Nosi had joined a local church choir. The church couldn't afford good microphones or a working keyboard, but people came just to hear her sing. Her voice had this way of stopping even the rowdiest children in their tracks. Some said it was angelic, others said it was haunting, but everyone agreed it was unforgettable. It was during a regional gospel concert in Ngugu that fate decided to whisper her name. Nosi sang an original piece titled "I Rise Because You Carried Me," a heartfelt tribute to Auntie Fiona and her sisters. The performance moved the crowd to tears, including a visiting music producer named Mr. Rex Okoye, known for discovering raw talent in remote corners of the country. After the show, he approached her backstage. "Young lady," he said, struggling to hold back emotion, "your voice will shake nations. Let me help you tell your story." And so began Nosi's ascent. Not fast, but steady. She moved to Lagos under Mr. Rex's mentorship, recorded her debut single, and slowly built a fan base with her raw, soulful gospel. Unlike other upcoming artists desperate for fame, Nosi refused to alter her style to suit trends. Her message was always clear: faith, family, forgiveness. Her breakout moment came during a live gospel night aired across Africa. Dressed in a flowing white gown, she sang "We're Not Forgotten," and the entire hall stood still. Even the cameras paused, focusing on her tear-filled eyes as she sang, "We were thrown away like dust, but God used us to write a story of gold." The song went viral overnight, not just in Nigeria, but across Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, and even the UK. Churches began inviting her. Her songs played at weddings, funerals, and political gatherings. People who had never met her cried when they heard her sing. With the rise came more responsibilities. Nosi founded the Carriers Foundation, named after her most famous lyric. The NGO provided scholarships to girls from rural villages and offered counseling services to orphan children. She also met Michael Eze, a gentle-spirited documentary filmmaker who had lost both parents young and connected deeply with Nosi's story. He was filming a series about gospel musicians who rose from hardship and insisted that Nosi's story deserved more than an album. It needed to be told on screen. Their bond grew beyond interviews and late-night editing sessions. Michael understood her silences. He didn't try to fix her, he simply held space for her to be. He once told her, "You don't have to perform for love, Nosi. Just sing, and I'll be here." They got married at a private beachside chapel in Lagos, surrounded by loved ones and supporters from across Africa. Nosi walked down the aisle to her own live performance of "He Called Me His Own," holding back tears. Ada stood by her as maid of honor, Chisom designed her gown, and Michael filmed their first dance. Uncle Dominic was not there. He had, of course, heard about the wedding. Everyone in Enugu had. The local vendor who once insulted the girls for not affording meat now bragged that he once knew the famous singer girl when she lived in Nsukka. Even the local church replayed her wedding song during service. But for Uncle Dominic, it was another bitter echo in the chambers of his regret. Each of the girls had now risen, and not only had they had risen without him. He sat alone on the same porch where he had once smoked and laughed while throwing them out. He watched ants crawl across his cracked sandals. And in the background, from a neighbor's radio, Nosi's voice played once again. I was the stone you cast away, but look how the builder chose me anyway. Tears filled his eyes, not because he was proud, but because he was completely forgotten. Not even an invitation, not even a mention. And as Nosi boarded a flight to London for her first international concert, hand in hand with Michael, her thoughts turned once again to Auntie Ifeoma, the woman who had believed in their dreams when they had nothing, the true builder behind their miracle. And this was just the beginning. Uncle Dominic sat on a wooden stool outside a crumbling mud house in the remote village of Umweze, far from the city lights and prideful estates he once called his own. The once proud man who had thrown his nieces into the streets now lived as a shadow among villagers who wanted nothing to do with him. His skin had darkened from too much sun, his clothes were often wrinkled and torn, and his eyes had become hollow, always scanning the horizon as though searching for redemption. He had lost the mansion years ago, not through theft or betrayal, but by the simple truth of justice. The original will, discovered and presented by the girl's lawyer, had made it clear. Their late father intended for his daughters to inherit the property. Once the legal case was settled, the mansion that once echoed with Uncle Dominic's authority was reclaimed by the rightful heirs. He had packed his bags quietly, without protest, and left the premises as the villagers looked on. Some laughed, others simply turned away. There was no sympathy for a man who had taken joy in the misfortune of orphans. His own kinsmen had excommunicated him, calling him a disgrace to the family lineage. You cast out your brother's children for being girls, one elder had spat at him, and now the gods have cast you out in return. His days in Umweze were filled with silence and murmurs. The villagers avoided him. The children whispered stories of the evil uncle who once owned a mansion but now can't afford to repair his leaking roof. Dominic tried to hold on to whatever dignity he had left, but even that faded with time. What made it worse, what tore his heart in two, was the news that always seemed to find its way to him.
First, it was Ada's wedding. The eldest girl, now a respected nurse in London, had married a UK-based Nigerian doctor. The villagers gathered at a neighbor's house to watch clips of the events on Facebook. Dominic had sat nearby, pretending not to watch, but every sound pierced his heart like a blade. Then came Chisom's story in the local newspaper. Her fashion label had been featured for designing outfits for foreign dignitaries during an international event in Abuja. The girls from Umeyize who wore her dresses danced through the village in celebration, holding up banners and pictures of the once homeless fashion designer. Again, Uncle Dominic stood by, invisible, irrelevant. When Nosi's wedding happened, the final blow landed. Her song, He Called Me His Own, played across radio stations, churches, and even at village events. It was as though the world itself had chosen to remind him of the one truth he couldn't escape. He had thrown away gold because it came wrapped in femininity. Not one of the girls sent him an invitation. No letter, no call, not even a whisper of pity. And they were right. He spent his evenings under the old mango tree, chewing dry cola nut and staring at the red sky. Sometimes he spoke aloud as though the wind could carry his words to the girls. "Forgive me, I didn't know better." But the wind never replied. There were rumors that Aunt Ifeoma had offered to send him money once, but the girls refused. "He must drink the cup he poured for us," Ada had said. One morning, an old villager passing by saw Dominic sobbing quietly with his face buried in his palms. When asked what was wrong, he simply replied, "I used to be a man who had everything. Now, I'm not even a memory worth keeping." That day, the church bell rang for evening prayers, and the choir began rehearsing for Sunday service. The final sting came when the choir sang one of Nosi's most famous songs. It echoed through the village as Dominic walked back to his hut. What they broke, he made whole. What they threw away, he raised on gold. And as the melody drifted into the evening breeze, Uncle Dominic shut the creaking door behind him. Not even the insects sang with him. Only silence remained. His name would never appear in their wedding albums. not in their dedications, not in their future stories. He was a chapter they had turned but never needed to reread. Dominic, once the feared uncle in Enugu, now lived and died in the shadow of his own mistakes. Forgotten, rejected, alone. And that, perhaps, was the justice life had reserved for him. If this story touched you, please don't just scroll away. Like this video to support our channel. Comment your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Angel Chukwu Stories and turn on the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that life always comes full circle.